Hello, this is woodblock printmaker Dave Bull speaking to you again from my Tokyo workroom. This is the fourth in the series of videos showing the production of Jed Henry's Fox Moon print from the beginning of his design right through to the finished project. When I left you at the end of the last video, we had just finished carving the color blocks and ready to begin proofing, and I can report now that that was very successful and we have a beautiful, spectacular print to show you. You'll see it at the end of this video. What you're about to see now is some clips that I took during the process of proofing, showing each color being laid down on the print and then building up so you can see how it all comes together. It's a bit long, but I hope you'll have the patience to stick with it, and there's a nice reward at the end. Boy, is there ever a nice reward at the end. Let me get busy now with the iMovie software and start to get things ready for you. Before the washi paper can be used for printing, it has to be coated with a solution of warm size. This is made from gelatin and alum. We do both sides. For many years I used to get this done for me by a professional, the last surviving professional to do this work, but for the last few years I've given up on him for reasons we don't need to go into, and I'm now doing it by myself. After the moisture in the stack has stabilized, 30 minutes or so, I take the whole thing upstairs to the room where it's a bright, airy room upstairs, and I hang each sheet up to dry. It usually takes a few hours. We are 4 stories up from the workroom downstairs, where we'll go in a minute. And here we are down in the second basement. This is going to be the scene of the crime, where all the printing is going to take place. Let's work through. There's the block for the key block, the baron. Next to it is a small cup with paste and some water. In the plastic bag in front of me will be the paper ready for printing. It could be 200 sheets. Today it's just 3 or 4 because we're still testing. There's the rich pigment, the black pigment, along with the brush I'll use to put it on the paper, and the water brush for general use. Over on the right side is more supplies. We have a bottle of paste and a bottle of alcohol there used for mixing pigments, and the 5 blocks carved both sides. Next to those you can see the palette that will be used for this print, the various colors, prepared and mixed with a few notes, some more brushes. And on the right there, those are the large brushes I'll be using to apply most of the colors that you see go onto the block. At one place on my workbench, I've pasted down a working list. This has got these 17 different impressions that I think we'll probably need for this print. The printing on a traditional Japanese ukiyo-e print always starts with the key block. That goes on first, and the colors then fit later into the outlines that are then defined. The material here is a black sumi pigment. We call it bokuju, and there's a tiny bit of paste also mixed in with it to smooth it out. The final brush stroke's very delicate, and the paper comes out of the stack. It's moistened paper. It will stay at the same level of moisture from beginning right through to the end of this process. As I add moisture to it by putting on thick pigments, it has to be dried off a little bit part way through. The key block like this won't be adding too much moisture to it, and it won't need any specific adjustment. That little twist you saw me give the Baron tool there was to stop wear building up. There's sharp points inside the coil, and if I don't rotate it now and then, those sharp points tend to dig their way through the outer cover, and it needs to be replaced sooner than would be necessary. Rotating it like that makes it last a bit longer. I'm trying to cover every last square centimeter of this design, watching this part needs a bit more, that part needs a bit more. Human printing press. That should be enough. Let's see what it looks like. There we go. Fox Moon starts to come alive. As was mentioned back during the carving process, this Fox Moon print is a bit special in that it has 2 key blocks. The one we just saw, the black outlines of all the characters, and then this one. This is going to be done in light blue, and this has the outlines of the clouds on which our characters are flying. I'm rubbing it actually a bit hesitantly here because although Carver Dave knows what these blocks are all like down to the finest detail, Printer Dave isn't yet familiar with them, and just what's under that piece of paper, where the lines are, his hand hasn't yet learned. So you have to be careful not to smash it around too much. And here's the first of the color blocks. There's a bit of paste gets dropped onto the block. That's a bit of water. The pigment's actually already in the brush. I've already done one sheet before that. And here we go. The pigment has to be spread around over the whole block, and has to be done so in a way that doesn't leave dark areas in one place or light areas in another place. Dig it around, make sure it's smoothly spread around. Then the last step, brush gently like this to try and remove all brush strokes, because those too would be visible in the finished print if I left them. And now the real hard work begins. Look at that. I'll roll up the sleeves and away you go. As I said before, human printing press. And that's really, really what we are. Every color of every sheet impressed by hand in every square centimeter. Turn the barren cover again. Look for this zone, look for that zone. Track the whole thing to make sure not any area gets overlooked. That last one we saw was a light base tone for the clouds. There will be more going over top of it later. But we can't print quickly right after one area on top of another one. So I'll move to a different part of the print now. This is an area that's going to be sort of a wood colored, parts of the clothing, parts of the various tools that the boys are carrying. What's happening here, of course, you'll see this a million times, is the paper goes into the corner registration mark first, and then onto the other registration mark. And every sheet has to be lined up exactly to the fraction of a millimeter. Some of the key block lines on this print are so thin that any slight misregistration of any of the colors would destroy the whole print. This is something we see a number of times in this print. I do a base tone first. This is a flat tone, and over top of this we will have a carved, delicate pattern coming later. By doing it this way, we don't have to carve the pattern twice in positive and in negative. Just carving it once in positive and then printing it over a flat base tone gives us the effect we need. Look at that, it switched barons for a moment there. There's a part of this that needs quite heavy pressure, and then a part of it with very delicately carved parts that needs light pressure, and one easy way to do it is to use two barons. We're back on the cloud colors building up now. Now that a bit of time has passed, it's probably an hour or something since I did that first one, the paper is stabilized a bit, and I can now put the second level of color up on the cloud. This is a blue-gray type of pattern. You can't see it on the block. These colors are all so thin that it's impossible to tell, looking at the wood, what kind of pigment has been brushed over it. It's only once you finish rubbing and peel it off and look on it that you can realize, yeah, it's a bit too dark or a bit too light, and then adjust the amount that you put on for the next impression. So at this point, I'm just flying by experience, because you can't see anything on that piece of wood. A couple of things to note about this one. I've switched to a different kind of brush. Obviously, this is a smaller brush for a smaller area. Rather than the shoe brush type, it's a small vertical stand-up brush. This is a blue color for some of the clothing of the wingmen. And also on the same block, you can see it's going to get covered up right now. There's another blue area for the rabbit's clothing. Later, when we're all sorted out what to do here, I'll just have two brushes, one in each hand, and I will color them both at the same time so they get printed together. And this is that second blue that I mentioned. It's quite a lighter blue, a different tone actually, and it's for part of the rabbit's clothing. We're back on the blocks that build up the cloud tones again, and something worth mentioning is that these blocks 1, 2, 3, 4 are not just the same area getting smaller and smaller, but there's some areas on this one that weren't on the first and second one. So it's not 4 different colors we're going to get here, but a number of different tones, A plus B, A plus C, B plus C. That sort of approach is happening here. And the blocks aren't just making colors for the clouds. I'm rubbing right there over the frog's kimono. Part of this block that's giving a deeper tone of part of the clouds also produces one of the kimono pattern tones. Well, look at that, my pigment brush still has a note stuck to it. Remember, what you're seeing here is still that these were videos taken during the proofing process, not the actual production run. And there's memos and notes and tests of color strips all over the place. I think you can also hear in the workshop somebody else is printing. I think while I was taking this video, Tsushima-san is sitting working. She's building some of our gift prints at the moment. If you've seen one of the earlier videos in this sequence, the one where I was making the color separations, you heard me say at one point that I took, I think it was 12 color separations, and they were going to be pasted down on both sides of 5 blocks. At the time I didn't explain how that worked, but you can see it now. There's a green area and a red area on this piece of wood. I'm printing just the green here. The red will be done heads and tails. There's a second set of registration marks cut on this block. As it turned out, the green part only needed half the block, and the red part only needed half the block, but they were both the top half. So I got them both on one sheet of wood, on one piece of wood, by putting the two of them heads and tails. There's the green. Here's an interesting point. This is the brown block for the fox fur, but look in one corner there. There's an area that's not being covered with pigment here. This is where one of the cartouches on the print comes, and Jed and I have a little thing going back and forth between us. He thinks the cartouches on the print should all be white. I think there should be a tint of color on each one. Well, he's the boss, so what he says goes, and there won't be color in these cartouches. But I cut a block for them anyway, both on this print and on the previous rickshaw cart print. And I'm thinking that one day I'll be able to convince him to give it a try, and we'll perhaps have a future edition that's the color cartouche edition of Fox Moon. One can only hope. Here's the other side of that heads and tails job I mentioned earlier. We printed the green previously, now we're printing the red. It's for part of the kimono pattern on Falco and for a touch right there of red in the fox's mouth. Look at it, it's coming alive, you know, bit by bit. 4 or 5 to go? I'm not sure. Now here we are with the sky block, the black block for the sky. This is an impression that some years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, would have given me a lot of trouble. It has to be printed very smoothly, it needs a thick, rich pigment, and yet it's carved with a bunch of small holes that represent stars. And to make rich, thick pigment, you need lots of goop on the surface of the block, and it, of course, tends to fill in such small holes. I'm delicately brushing them out here. Wipe away a bit of mess, and take the impression. Missing any tiny corner of this, any part of it would result in a piece of the print that was lighter or not so black as the rest of the sky. Let's see how it turned out. That looks okay, but actually it's not dense enough. I can't put enough pigment on the block at any one time to get it as rich as I want. So the same block, the same pigment, the same color, we do it twice. It's also worth mentioning, it looks like black there, but it's not. It's 1/3 deep blue, 1/3 deep red, and 1/3 black. It gives it a deep purple kind of texture that we wouldn't get if it was just black. I'm skipping ahead here. Let's see now how it looks after a double impression. Much richer. Yes, look at this. Now here's one of those impressions that doesn't actually consist of much, but it makes a big, big difference in the finished work. And I've listed it in my list there as 1 impression, but it's actually 5. It's a series of small gradations that just add a bit of shadow tone to different areas of the fox's body. We'll skip through these all quite quickly because it takes quite a bit of time, but there's one at the base of his head. Then the same brush, just the tinge of pigment, goes at the end of his snout. You can barely see it here, but it's there. And when you get your print, you'll be able to see much more closely. One of his feet. See it there? And these are his 2 hands holding the sword. They get another one. The 5 gradations here. Every single copy of the 400 prints that we're going to make over the next few weeks has to get all 5 of these small gradations. Talk about handmade. It doesn't get any more handmade than this. The last one is a bit wider, so it needs a bit of a thicker brush. Change brushes here. It gets to be brushed out a bit more from the tip of his tail. What's it called? A brush, tip of the fox's brush. And there we have it. And that counts as 1 impression. That leaves just his whiskers. This is another one of those heads and tails block. We're just using a little bit of unused wood at the end of the green block to do this small, very faint impression, giving a few light whiskers. You may not even notice them in the finished print, but they're there. And we've come to the end of our 17. That's the end of my job here, and I think I'll just sit back for a while now, put the camera, call my friend Ken Burns here to come over, and let's take a look at this print close up. So there you have it. We're pretty happy with the way it's turned out, and we think a lot of other people will be too. Our focus now shifts. There's no more concern about design and choosing colors and anything like that. We now shift to production mode. We've got orders through Kickstarter for upwards of 400 of these, and we now have to switch from being artists to being craftsmen. Our job is to reproduce this master copy as perfectly and accurately as we can for the number of copies that we need. I'll be printing a lot of them myself. The ladies downstairs and I will be doing some together, and we're also going to use the resources of a good friend of mine, Mr. Shinkichi Numabe, one of the best printers downtown, who incidentally has also been pretty much brought back from the brink by the business generated by this Kickstarter campaign. I'll be visiting him in 3 or 4 days. I'm going to take the camera with me so you can see some shots of his workshop and what's going on down there. We'll have that video in about a week or so, I guess. I'm not quite sure. If you've watched so far, thank you very much for your patience and for your support of this, and we've been having a good time. I guess, as I said before, we hope everybody else is too. Thank you very much, and good night.